So on behalf of Skill-Lync, I welcome everybody. Those of you engaging with us for the first time, we are an engineering upskilling platform focused on advanced technologies in engineering across domains like mechanical, telecom, civil, electrical, electronics, etc. Today's webinar is on telecom security, its challenges and solutions. This is the 9th edition of our webinar for corporate professionals. And we are very glad to host two expert minds in this field for today's webinar. So first of all, we have Mr. Dmitry Kurbatov and Mr. Sanjay Kumar. Mr. Dmitry is a telecom cybersecurity expert and co-founder and CTO of SecurityGen. Since 2012, SecurityGen team has been serving mobile operators worldwide, assisting them in developing security strategies for emerging technologies while preventing fraud and ensuring network cyber resilience. And Mr. Sanjay is our in-house expert at Skill-Lync. He is the director of telecom and a senior telecom and 5G professional with 20 years of experience. He has trained over 20,000 people across 50 countries on 3G, 4G, 5G, core and cloud technologies in leading companies across the globe. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thanks, Venkat. Thanks for the introduction. Let me share my screen and, greetings, everyone. My name is Sanjay Kumar. I'm working with Skill-Lync as a director of telecom, primarily into education from last 15 plus years, almost 20 years of experience. Started with network, which were like wireline networks, where the security was just not a part of those networks, right? SS7 never talked about security. And then we moved on to the WLL networks, the wireless in local loop kind of networks, and then from there to 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. Over the period of time, the security landscape have changed drastically. The oldest form of the security breach, what we can think of, where we were in our room and talking to someone, and then somebody in the drawing room picks up the call, right? And they can hear what we were speaking to the other party, or maybe somebody teeing in your phone connection and then can actually hear whatever you are trying, and maybe make calls, right? That is the oldest form of security breach what we can think of. But over the period of time, the threats have changed exponentially. I think Dmitry is going to talk about that a lot, right? But we are now living in a very vulnerable world, right, where the security is a big problem in the open networks, in the cloudified networks, and then that's what is going to be the point of discussion on today's session. I'll start my session. I'll share my screen, and then maybe we can take it up from there. I hope my screen is visible. So this session is going to be about 5G telecom security, where I will be just spending first 10 minutes talking about some of the existing network scenarios and stuff like that. And then we will get into more details about the security paradigm shift, which will be taken up by Dmitry. I am from Skill-Lync. Dmitry comes from a company called SecurityGen, and he is one of the cybersecurity experts and have a lot of fantastic products, a lot of technologies on SS7, on SIP signaling, then GTP signaling. So yeah, if you really want to know more about it, you can check out his profile on LinkedIn. I'll share that. Or you can, I talk more from the generic telecom network perspective. So this is a little bit about me. So what is going to be the agenda for today? In today's session, we are going to talk about history of telecom and its evolution. We'll just see, how the telecom networks evolved and how do we really support the security in the legacy network. Wireline network initially started with almost no security, and then we started with 2G, where we started talking about authentications and stuff like that. But that was only the user side of authentication. In 3G, we also talked about mutual authentication, where user is going to authenticate the network before it is going to provide its information to the network. And then 4G continued with that. But even in 4G, there were some challenges where your INSI number, some of the information was sent in the plain text. We tried to change in 5G, where we brought in something called as SUCI, subscription concealed identifier, where we actually don't send our original identity in the plain text format, right? So we'll also talk about changing security landscape in telecom industry and why do we really need this change. That is something what I will be covering in this session, and then I'll take it up, forward to Dmitry, and where Dmitry will talk about emerging threats in the telecom networks, what are the challenges and solution, and what are the strategies for resiliency in the telecom network, right? As we mentioned, this is an open session, so we may not get into deep technical concepts, keeping it very, very high level. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop your questions to us and we will be happy to answer those. We have muted all the mics. If you have any question, you can raise your hands and we will be able to unmute you, or maybe open the chat where you will be able to write your question. We will be having some Q&A session at the end of the session. And we will be uploading this video on YouTube, and link will be shared with all of you. Right. If you need any more information, you can visit www.skill-link.com. Right. I will be sharing the SecurityGen. Maybe Dmitry can share the link, hyperlink for the SecurityGen website as well. Right. So I come from around 20 years of work experience in telecom, worked with a variety of different companies, worked with almost all the technologies, starting from 2G and going up to the cloud kind of network. Worked with various products like Samsung, Nokia, Ericsson, ZTE, Cisco. I'm one of the certified AWS certified solution architect and AWS authorized instructor. Right. Now, talking about security in legacy network, right? So we started, as I mentioned, we started with wireline network. In wireline network, typically we always get connected to the network by using a pair of wire. So we remember we used to have a telephone connection, and we used to connect to the exchange with a wireline network, with a wireline connection, which used to be a coaxial cable in the early days of telecom, and then it got into something called as twisted pair cable. But the only thing what you can do is you can actually tee in, where you have this wire going on, you connect from here, you connect from here, and you connect another device here, and you can actually tape into that particular connection. You can hear whatever is happening on that particular wire. There was no encryption, there was no security, nothing at all. But yes, in the exchanges, we were using something called as SS7. SS7 was one of the main protocol which was used for signaling system number 7, which was again came up with a lot of evolution. It started with something called as channel associated signaling, moved into CCS. Then there is V5.1, V5.2, and finally, after a lot of evolution, we reached to the SS7. SS7 protocol is one of the protocol which actually, I can say kind of last protocol which was in the wireline network. After that, there were no lot of evolution which has happened. The only evolution what we have seen is SIGTRAN, signaling over IP transport, where all these TDM based links, the point-to-point links, have started moving into IP transport. And that's where we started having a lot of problems, because we are moving towards a lot of open networks. And that's where we started having problems. So we need to find a way to secure our SS7. And I think SecurityGen does that very beautifully. Maybe Dmitry can talk about it, right? But this is one of the challenge, because traditionally our telecom networks were point-to-point networks, and they were originally not designed to be secure, unlike IP networks, because IP networks were more or less open networks, and they were having some security features from the day one, right? But telecom networks were not designed that way. Secondly, what we started having at this point of time, where we started moving to wireless network, right? The SIM card is a device, is an entity which was not always connected to the network. So what we wanted to have is, we wanted to understand that, hey, how do we really secure that somebody will not steal your identity of a SIM card? So what we started doing is, we started having a network component called as AUC. And AUC used to give some kind of identity to VLR. VLR will send some kind of challenge, which is typically called as random number. And based on this random number, UE generates a response, which is called as RES, which comes back to VLR. VLR gets one information from AUC, one information from the user, and VLR has to match it. And if they are same, the user is authenticated. So that's the way we started doing authentication in 2G network. However, at a later stage, we also realized that it's not only the users who can be fake, sometimes even network can be fake, right? So network can be legitimate, right? So what we started doing is, we started doing mutual authentication, where network provides the authentication details to UE in the form of AUTN, authentication token, and then it sends back the response. Okay, here sends back the response, which is typically matched from the response coming from the AUC, authentication center. So basically what we were doing here is, we were doing mutual authentication. Before I provide you my authentication detail, the user provides network the authentication detail. network has to authenticate itself. So we started doing mutual authentication. But even in this scenario, most of the time user was sending the information in the plain text, and that is continued in 4G as well. In 5G, what we are doing is we are getting into another mode of authentication where user is not going to send IMSI number, but user is actually sending another number, which is called as SUCI, subscription concealed identifier, which is one-time use identity for the user. So there are a lot of things which have changed from the user perspective and of course from the network perspective. And why do we really need a new approach in 5G? 5G is not the same network what we used to have in 2G, 3G. Right? Mostly they were purpose-built hardware, the telecom specific protocols and stuff like that. But now we are moving towards a lot of openness in the network. So we have open networks, and now if you look at the protocols, most of the protocols are being scrapped and they are actually transforming into HTTP2 or JSON kind of information. Right. We are having a lot of cloud-based deployments. So everything, every security. So if you have gone through some cloud training, they typically talk about, the security of the cloud and security in the cloud. Security of the cloud is the responsibility of the cloud provider, but security in the cloud is the responsibility of the customer who is using that cloud infrastructure. So all the complexity related to security of the cloud are also a part of telecom network. Also, we are talking about some network equipments like network exposure function, NEF, which can enable the third-party applications to get exposure to the core network or sometimes radio network as well. And we have to control that exposure. We are also planning to connect millions of devices to our telecom network, and that will actually create a lot of touch points. So every touch point becomes a security threat for the telecom network. So more touch points we have and more threats we are going to get. The network slicing is another area where we need to have a complete isolation between the different network slices. The networks are getting distributed. There are some central network, there are some edge networks, and every different piece of network brings in a lot of security threats. And of course, the applications are changing in a big way. Just to take an example, this is how our networks are today, right? We have some VR glasses, some user equipment, some laptops, and some n number of other devices, n number of another Internet of Things devices, right? Now, where we can have the security threats. So we can have security threats from any compromised UE or any IoT device. We can have inside threats or human errors. We can have side channel attack by third-party virtual network function. We can have attacks from internet. We can have attacks from physical access to G-Node, attacks from partner network or 5APX. So the security surface is increasing day by day, and that makes our network prone to a lot of security challenges. And that's what we are going to discuss here. So that's all from my side. I'll hand it over to Dmitry, and Dmitry, please take it up here. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the brilliant introduction. Thank you, Sanjay. Give me a second. I'll share my screen. So, quick one. As already said, my name is Dmitry. I'm CTO and co-founder at SecurityGen. And today we are going to talk about the interesting and, in my opinion, very important topic of telecom security and 5G security. But before we dig into this topic, let me tell you just a little bit about myself and the excellent team that I'm proud to be of, because maybe this will give you a little bit more of understanding why I'm so excited, let's say, about the safety of telecommunications and especially about the 5G technology. So, as already, let's say, highlighted, I'm the cybersecurity guy, telecom cybersecurity expert. As of today, I'm playing the role of the Chief Technology Officer at SecurityGen. In our company, we mainly serve mobile operators. We help them to identify vulnerabilities, to protect core network, and to detect suspicious activity. And given, let's say, my passion and a little bit of knowledge in this kind of technologies and cybersecurity, sometimes I'm invited to participate in different kind of lectures, forums, webinars, and I find this one today particularly rewarding. So big thanks to Sanjay and Skill-Lync for inviting me. Just few words about my team, actually, the track record, let's say, of our team. This is a small team, but quite capable, with some of the technical guys, research professionals, developers. I worked pretty much since 2012, maybe, and we've been serving mobile operators across the globe. We assist them in identification of vulnerabilities, research and security analysis of different technologies. Sometimes we help to perform and conduct some kind of security strategy, cyber resiliency plan. And I must say that over these years, we had a privilege to conduct research over a wide range of technologies, starting from 4G, 5G, different type of virtualization technologies like SDN and AVI, a lot of pieces of IoT and OT, among others. And I must say that some of these technologies we started at the very initial stages of their widespread implementation, which is particularly important for technicians, for researchers. So it's been, I would say, quite a nice journey and quite a nice ride already. And of course, we look forward to continue to explore new possibilities in this field. And as active members of the community, we always try to participate as much as possible to share the knowledge and findings that we collect across the industry. Continuously, we communicate all the findings with our clients. And sometimes when we are invited, we present our research to organizations like GSMA, ITU, ENISA, governmental bodies, and so on. Also including security conferences across the globe when we have time, even though it's a little bit challenging since COVID. So this is what I want to share with you today. Sanjay already made the brief history of the telecom and its evolution and how security pieces and legacy networks used to operate. So I will give you a little bit more perspective on the changing security and threat landscape. I will speak about the emerging threats, why we face so many challenges and what are the possible solutions. And we speak just a little bit about the strategy, how to make organizations more resilient when they face cybersecurity incidents. But first, I would like to raise the question why a person could actually think about becoming a cybersecurity pro. And I must brief you about on a couple of important, let's say, numbers. For instance, last year, the cybersecurity workforce globally has reached its pretty much all-time high, about 4.7 million professionals globally. And this is a big number, quite a big number, but hard to estimate if 4.7 security people are actually enough to protect the digital world of today. I must say that actually it's not enough. And the same research identified that pretty much 70% more needed. So there is a shortage of 3.4, maybe 3.5 million workers in this field. And if you take a closer look over the market and the situation, I think it's pretty much easy to explain. We're continuously facing digital new frontiers. And obviously, these expand the threat landscape and threats that are continuously evolving quite rapidly, I must say. I believe you're able to notice this. And definitely this creates the demand for security professionals. But due to maybe slow pace of education, maybe lack of some training, year by year, we see that the shortage of cybersecurity people increase and also increase the so-called skill gap, which is a very dangerous thing because skill gap is when there are unfortunately a lot of professionals who do not possess the right and full range of skills required today to effectively counter modern cyber threats. This is not good. And as you know, a lot of companies on the market, they propose smarter tools, more automation to resolve this issue. And definitely, this is one of the ways to address the challenge and protect the world. But at the same time, I guess nobody can say that you don't need education. And skilled professionals are not needed anymore simply because we have smarter tools, that everything is orchestrated, and AI will run it all anyway soon. No, it's not like this. We need people. So today I will speak a lot about cybersecurity in telecoms, in 5G, but I will also put a lot of, let's say, attention on the, let's say, skilled professionals and how important it is to have the right team who can actually execute the plan. Before I start, I would like to make a quick sync up with you, just to make sure that we have the similar understanding of some critical terms, let's say the same vocabulary. So let's quickly recap what cybersecurity is. There are many definitions for information security, for cybersecurity, and so on. And Wikipedia, for instance, says that cybersecurity is protection of computer systems and networks from different attacks. And this is completely true. If we reference to the information security theory, well, it will probably put just 3 words: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is clear. This is like the basics. But I would also like to give you my simple definition of cybersecurity for organization, which is like a digital security guard, making sure that the organization is safe from cyber attacks. And when I say safe, it means that all the critical business processes are protected. All the unacceptable risks are minimized to the acceptable level. And that in general, organization can face the attack because inevitably each organization will face an attack one day. But it's important that it can resist and can recover once it stops. This is when we speak about the cybersecurity of any kind of organization. When we speak about 5G, it's much wider. If you had a chance, maybe you've seen the movie of last year called Everything, Everywhere, and All at Once. Quite good one. And I would say that if 3GPP, the organization which developed the 5G standard back in 2016, I believe, if these guys, they had been a little bit savior with the marketing, probably they can use this as a catchphrase: everything, everywhere, and all at once. Because 5G encompasses a very vast range of vendors, suppliers, integrators, operators, and even more organizations probably will join this fold. And while 5G hasn't yet become the dominant technology, maybe it will never become, maybe 6G will become the dominant technology, but possibly some time in future it will even substitute Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and other kind of the wireless technologies. However, we should be realistic in the fact that with the advanced connectivity, it also increased the demand for additional safeguarding of the vast amount of data which transit and processed in these networks. And cybersecurity in this context, it's not an optional add-on anymore. This is actually a vital component of our digital infrastructure. And here you can see the list. Sorry for the very small font. This is the list. Give me a second. Not the list, but the diagram of all of these, let's say, organizations which are in one or another way included into the 5G ecosystem. This is the important thing, because when we speak about the telecom security, okay, we speak on the high level, but it's important to understand who are actually the beneficiaries of this security. Definitely, network operators, yes, they are, because they need to protect their business. The second group, probably end users, individuals, subscribers like us. And we want our data to be safe, and we think that the responsibility to protect relies on service provider. And it's actually the telecom company who should take care about our cybersecurity. It's the arguable question if it is true or not. And to a large extent, this depends on the local regulations. And this leads us to the, let's say, governmental guys. governmental bodies, regulators, local telecom authorities. These organizations, they do care about the critical national infrastructure. They take care about people, personal data. They enforce regulations to define some, let's say, baseline for security, simply because they think that this helps to protect the nation interests. There is another big group of beneficiaries, B2B sector, enterprises, customers. They need to protect their business as well. And the interesting factor of enterprises is that they're continuously paying for something. They're buying communication services. They're paying for computing power in the cloud. They're buying software licenses or subscriptions. So probably they're also interested to pay for cybersecurity if it is proven by business need and it really helps to minimize unacceptable risk for organization. And probably the last one, and the also very big group of beneficiaries are vendors and system integrators. For all of them, indeed, cybersecurity is the new opportunity to create new offering, to supply new services, and this helps to create new revenue streams. But as we know, nothing is free of charge, and there is always someone who is paying for the cybersecurity. And usually it's distributed across all of these groups. As we see with this continuous evolution of generations of mobile technology, what happens also is the responsibility. For instance, maybe 20 years ago, in the era of 2G, the majority of responsibility relied on main vendors like giant companies which were in charge to provide radio network, transport network, core. They were doing majority of the integrations. They were providing billing and so on. And back then, maybe mobile network operators, they were doing just a tiny bit of, let's say, they were operating, right? They took the responsibility of the much smaller part of the network, actually. They were buying a lot, they were subcontracting a lot, they were outsourcing a lot. But as we move to the era of 4G and 5G, we see that actually there are a lot of alternative players appear, smaller vendors, and they take a bigger role and they play a bigger role on the market. They also provide core access, computing power. They provide security, sometimes even in form of managed security services, for instance. And I cannot even say that the responsibility that telecom takes, it's dramatically increased. It's really dramatic, I mean, because I'm not even ready to, how to say it, clearly separate what new alternative vendors doing and telecom companies doing, because some of the telcos today, they also trying to develop themselves, and this is good because we've seen very brilliant examples on the market, like Rakuten in Japan, for instance. They developed the so-called Symphony platform, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the platform offering both radio, orchestration, and so on. I'm sure that Jio in India, they're actually developing the entire 5G stack. This is good because this is the very smart choice. If you're a telco company and you are on the way to make the digital transformation happen, you should be able to execute quickly. And in today's world, it means that you need to code yourself, you need to commit fast, you need to roll out immediately, to do all possible to speed up go-to-market with whichever service you're actually providing. And this is why alternative vendors, smaller, more flexible, and operators themselves, they take a bigger role in the overall, let's say, ecosystem. At the same time, with the evolution of, let's say, responsibilities and so on, we see the dramatic evolution of threats. This is pretty much the usual situation. Before, it was pretty much about some fraudulent activities, some, let's say, wishy-washy schemes with text messages, free of charge calls, bypass and billing evasion. This was mainly the fraudulent activity. This was the interest of hackers and bad actors. easy way to monetize this, right? But since the 5G, and pretty much since actually the 4G era, what we see is that the attacks is actually the wide range of attacks covering both legacy threat landscape, which used to be purely in the legacy telecom world, but it also complemented with a much wider threat landscape, quite usual for IT systems. So let's speak a little bit more about threats, because this is probably the key here. What is actually, why it is so big? Well, once again, let's define what is, let's say, cybersecurity threat first. Usually, when we speak about the threat, it is a kind of, not a kind, it is a potential attack which can be carried out by individual or organization for different purposes. Maybe they're trying to get unauthorized access. Maybe they're trying to corrupt data. Maybe they're trying to steal information. The important thing is that all of these threats, they increase the likelihood of very nasty events, right? Risks such as maybe disruption of business operations, maybe significant financial loss, maybe severe reputational impact, maybe hefty penalties, and so on, if you, for instance, fail to provide communication services to critical governmental bodies, among others. Usually, what constitutes the unacceptable risk for the organization varies quite a lot. But today, we're discussing the 5G ecosystem, and it's much broader, probably the broadest you can actually see as of today. Let me share with you just a quick example. In 2020, if I'm not mistaken, ENISA, the European Institute for Cybersecurity, they released so-called 5G cybersecurity threat landscape. This is a very hefty document which describes potential vulnerabilities across the different domains of the network, not even ecosystem, but the 5G network, from radio to backhaul, transport, core, virtualization, orchestration, all these, let's say, slices or layers of the telecom network. And it stretches over pretty much 250 pages. And yet it's not the complete list of threats. So today, as we navigate with this ever-changing telecom environment, we continually confronted by the emerging threats. And we have a joke, as in the words of my chief of research, he says always, Dmitry, it's not that complex as it seems. It's actually worse. And he certainly knows what he's talking about, because his team conducted maybe 100 plus offensive security audits over past 12 months. And what we do with the offensive audits, we actually see the network through the hacker's lens, and they are quite vulnerable. So many of these threats pictured in documents as potential, simply on the piece of paper, they are actually pretty much real. Let's make a quick think once again to make sure that we are aligned in terms of the definition, like, because I believe you guys mainly from the telecom space. What is actually the threat? How it is related to vulnerability? What is risk? Why it is important for organization, and how it can impact critical business services like providing connectivity to subscribers. The first term is vulnerability. Vulnerability, it's like a weak spot, maybe a loophole in your system or in special software, doesn't matter. It's just like a house with a broken window, for instance. So it's a place where a thief can actually use to get inside. This is the vulnerability. Threat is another kind of the, let's say, instance. Threat, it is actually the potential danger that can exploit the vulnerability. So if a thief knows about my broken window, then he can use it to get inside. This will be a form of unauthorized access, right? So this is the threat. And what is the risk? Risk is actually the potential damage which can occur as the result of exploitation of some vulnerability. So if the thief will enter through the broken window and steal some of my belongings, this is the risk. So let's say all of these terms, they are related because when we speak about the threat exploits a vulnerability and result in a risk. In other words, risk happens when a threat takes the advantage of a vulnerability. And then it is important to understand if the risk is critical or not, because if you're talking about broken window in my garage, where is only a couple of maybe old bicycles, of course, I will be probably upset if someone will steal my broken bicycles, but it's not critical for me. Instead, if the broken window is in my bedroom or in my office, and if he can steal my laptop or some of the documents, this will become critical for me. And this is why the risk assessment is an important exercise, because it helps organization to estimate which type of risk is critical and need to be prioritized in order to address it, and which one may be highly likely, like the broken window in the garage, but maybe I'm not ready to pay too much attention to it at the moment. So if we change the metaphor to telecom context, vulnerability can easily be maybe default password in some telecom equipment. What I wanted to explain is just like why cybersecurity is important and why it always focus to minimize the amount of vulnerabilities, like the amount of broken windows in the house, why it focus on threats, be aware of threats, because the threat, when you know about the threat, you could think about the potential impact, the potential risk, and then you start thinking about how to prevent it. To be more precise, there is a way to understand if the threat is potential or if it's real. In the early example of ENISA threat landscape, as I said, 250 pages of description of different vulnerabilities and threat landscape. It's a lot. It means that you probably have a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of potential threats, but how do you know which one are actually exploitable, which are highly likely exploitable, and which is the high priority for you to start spending your time trying to resolve it, to fix it? How do we understand? Usually we simply verify, and this is how it's done via offensive testing, penetration testing, security assessments. For instance, last year, our team of security auditors, maybe they conducted about 100 security audits for different MNOs across the globe. Out of total amount, maybe 60 audits were dedicated telecom security assessments, which means these were specifically targeting the mobile core networks. We test the protocols like SS7, diameter, GDP, PFCP, exposed HTTP version 2, and so on. What our findings show is that in general, as of, let's say, half 2022, 2023, about 59% of networks have security solutions deployed. You can easily understand that it means that, in contrast, it means that 41% were not equipped with any kind of special security measures. And this means that these networks are probably relying on features of STPs, DAs, which also have some maybe filtering, screening functionality, but not that flexible, maybe not that comprehensive to address the current security needs. What we also identified is that I believe 11% of networks were very well protected, which means that it was extremely hard to execute any kind of attack and it had no success, which is good, but still only 11% globally. And I must say that we mainly work in Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. These are quite developed regions, actually. And we see very brilliant examples of very high maturity level in terms of cybersecurity. And still, when it comes to the protection of the telecom infrastructure and telecom assets, there are some dramatic challenges, and we will speak about this soon. What's really a big pity is that 89% of networks, they were extremely vulnerable and hackable. So our auditors, acting as a bad guys from the external side, trying to get insight into the network, trying to utilize known and maybe semi-known techniques, they were able to, let's say, to conduct different type of attack. They were able to execute and prove threats like personal information disclosure, location tracking, ability to manipulate with the data processed and stored in the network to influence the integrity of the information. They were able to conduct the precise denial of service for the specific subscriber, which is a form of targeted attack, and maybe more severe, to perform the denial of service targeting the network element, which can have much wider impact on the maybe network segment and so on. So till we are in year 2023, we are in the era of 5G, and we face a lot of challenges. This is true, and this is common, not frankly speaking, not only to telecoms, but this is common for IT industry in general. And so I hope I made it clear by now that there are a lot of potential threats, and quite a lot of them are actually verified and proven to be, let's say, to exist in the real world. So no surprises that it's a challenging task to address them all. And there are multiple reasons why it makes our life so hard to fix the situation. But I will try to summarize those challenges, which I think are very much common across different telecoms, and which are actually common for maybe even some other industries, but mainly for telecoms. The first reason, which is obvious to some extent, and Sanjay actually mentioned this, it has started pretty much in the time when we put FS7 into the IP level, introducing 6RAN. This is the convergence. Because today, telecom networks starting 4G actually, even earlier. But for 5G, this is absolutely the rule. Network itself integrate very wide range of technologies, and it increased complexity of the network dramatically. And so it's very hard to protect them. And with this vast array of technologies and devices, every brings their unique security needs and unique vulnerabilities as well. The second thing is that evolving hacking techniques. Inevitably, as technology advances, so do the hacking methods, tactics, techniques. Cyber criminals, they are continuously developing more and more sophisticated ways to exploit different information systems, and 5G is not an exception. And all these challenges, it makes quite a complex task actually to protect 5G, and it requires a lot of collaboration of all the stakeholders whom we mentioned. But one thing is incredibly hard to address. This is the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, because the demand for such people outweighs supply, leaving organizations at risk. And this shortfall hampers actually a lot of efforts to secure 5G networks. Although in recent years, we see some improvements in education and training. So it's, I would say it's underway. But still, interesting statistics tells us that we need more trained professionals. I believe 2021, maybe early 2022, a survey conducted by Information System Security Association showed that about 70% of organizations were impacted by the cybersecurity skill shortage, with almost 45% of organizations stated that the situation had actually worsened over the past few years. Well, I would say this is why it's such kind of an interesting area to explore and to discover and to dig deeper, because definitely a lot of professionals are missing. Fortunately, we are, let's say, not powerless against all of these threats and all of these challenges. And there are very nice tried and tested approaches with almost I believe, with almost decades, let's say, of practical implementation in IT. The only thing that here is the IT with tried and tested approaches to cybersecurity, and here is the telecoms. Not only telecoms, by the way, industrial security is also on the same level. And there is a gap. So what we do, we try to minimize this gap, to breach these practices, to consider and take into account all the legacy and all the peculiarities of the telecom world, and to utilize best practices from the IT cybersecurity. Altogether, it can work quite efficiently with the help of different frameworks. And I must say that one of the good ones are the cybersecurity framework by NIST organization. It really plays very big, significant even role in addressing multiple challenges in a very structured and coherent manner. If you're not familiar with this, these are so-called 5 critical pillars of cybersecurity. It states that in order to protect the organization and to be able to efficiently introduce resiliency into your business operations, you need to be able to identify first. So the first function of NIST framework, it helps to understand the business context. What are the resources? What are the assets which support critical business processes? What are the relevant cyber threats? And this is, to some extent, this is the task of inventory altogether with risk assessment. Very important because it helps you to understand which are your crown jewels and how to prioritize different exercises. The second part is about protection, because once the key elements are identified, definitely you need to be proactive in implementing some measures to establish the minimum protection for these crown jewels. And this can include firewalls, security, security of data, access control. Many exercises can be in the list of proactive security measures helping to protect the system. But the next one is also very interesting and also very important, because this framework says that you need to continuously monitor, to look for the anomalies, to continuously look for potential breaches, compromisation, because you cannot create, let's say, fully protected castle. No one is bulletproof. Even if you introduce proactive measures, probably it will never be enough to be 100% secure. Or it will simply take too much time, it will be too much costly. So you need to find the right balance between the proactive measures and the ability to identify if you are under attack and you need to do something with this. So this is what detect function is responsible for. Next one is also very interesting. This is called the response, the ability to respond, because today or tomorrow maybe, well, the breach will occur. And you need to have a plan in place how to respond. You need to have the plan for the crisis management. And once let's say, this happens, you need also the plan to recover. And NIST framework specifically stipulates the plan for the recovery after breach, which should include how you restore the system, how you back up, how you actually analyze the lessons learned to update your security protocols and protection measures. I must say that in telecom world, even keeping the accurate inventory of telecom assets, it's always been a very complex task. It involves a diverse array of hardware and software components, each playing some unique role in ensuring the seamless connectivity and service delivery. But now imagine that quite complex system in general, and the complexity is growing exponentially, because each single box that you can see on this picture, on this scheme, it represents the particular software piece executing some network function. And when we move to 5G, when we move to the cloud-based environment with software SBA architecture, This can be actually, and it is fragmented into multiple microservices running in containers. And of course, these microservices individually, they are scalable, they are deployable, they are programmable. So this is very good. This provides a lot of flexibility and efficiency. However, this also leads to the surge of the number of components to manage and to secure. And let's consider a simple example. When previously you had a single box, maybe a server, which might have hosted some application that performed a specific function. And with the shift to microservices, a single function might now be spread across multiple services, each performing a part of the overall task. And this can be even distributed across maybe multiple locations. This means that instead of keeping track of one box with maybe one or couple of applications, now you have to monitor 5, 10, or maybe dozens of microservices in some cases per single application or single service. And of course, every microservice has its own life cycle, its own dependencies. And if we add the dynamic nature of containers environment, where services can be easily spun up or down based on the demand, and this will give you maybe a sense of how the inventory management is complicated in 5G environment. Another interesting thing is that when we speak about approaches, how to actually address cybersecurity issues, some people tend to think that NIST-like frameworks is actually a sequence, while it's not. It's more about the process approach, because the order can be different. It doesn't have to be step by step. It doesn't have to be you identify, then you protect, then you detect, then you respond, and after this you remediate. It's important to understand the applicability of these activities to your business process. And if I believe you can easily imagine the situation when you, for instance, ordered offensive security testing. Auditors, they have identified some critical vulnerabilities, maybe related to the HSS system. And then you approach network department to search for support to fix the vulnerability. But maybe it's not impossible immediately. Maybe it requires some feature request from the vendor. Maybe it requires to wait for the next maintenance window. It requires testing and so on. In this case, maybe from the security point of view, you are able to identify, you even have some plan how to, let's say, remediate, but it's impossible to fix immediately. So all you can do in these circumstances, probably you will put it into the detection to be the precise visibility, to have the precise visibility. If someone will ever try to exploit this vulnerability, this will raise the red flag in your system and immediately will launch the, let's say, some kind of the crisis protocol, how to respond, how to recover, and maybe this is actually the way how it should work. And this actually what dramatically complements to the risk management and threat modeling, the verification of threats and verification of risks. Because as I said previously, never in the current history, security will be able to address all the vulnerabilities and all the threats. It will be always the task of prioritization in order to focus on what's really critical. What's good, another important thing of the NIST-like frameworks is that it actually proposes you with a systematic and very comprehensive approach, which allows the organization to manage even the complexity of the 5G. I tell you for sure because we've been working with multiple MROs, implementing this as a daily routine. And the good thing is that such frameworks focus on continuous review and continuous improvement to ensure that the cybersecurity measures keep the pace and are able to be, let's say, to be relevant to the rapidly evolving threat landscape. Also, in the context of the 5G security, there is a critical piece which is very familiar to the IT cybersecurity, but unfortunately not very well developed in the telecom world as of now. But there is some progress. This is the threat intelligence. It plays really a very significant role due to the increased complexity and the size of the ecosystem. So primarily, the threat intelligence contributes in form of the information intelligence, which provides organization with up-to-date information about potential threats and vulnerabilities in the 5G ecosystem. And pretty much all the players of the ecosystem and all the stakeholders can be the source of the threat intelligence and can be the consumers of threat intelligence. For instance, we are in SecurityGen. We are running some security audit. We identified some zero-day vulnerability. Absolutely, for sure, we will communicate this information to the vulnerable vendor. We will communicate this information to the customer. But this information, in some time, maybe in a little bit obfuscated manner, should also be communicated to the rest of the parties, because potentially their networks are also vulnerable and they should be aware of this. Another piece is that by understanding actually the threat landscape, organizations can have a chance to implement proactively very much appropriate security measures to protect the infrastructure. Because if you remember the statistics of the offensive audits that I showed previously, 59% of the networks, they have some security measures in place. And still, 89% of the networks are pretty much vulnerable, with only 11% of the operators very well secure. This means that people spend time, money, resources, efforts to implement some security measures, and for some reason, it's not really efficient. And I must say that in a lot of cases, this is due to the maybe not really good configuration. But why we have some kind of pathetic configuration on the network firewall or signaling firewall is because you need to have knowledge how to configure it in order to be able to block illegitimate traffic. And where you get this intelligence if it's not widely available, if it's not communicated across the industry and across multiple players. So this is why informing about the threat intelligence, informing about security measures is such a critical part of the threat intelligence approach in general. Now the next one. When security incident occurs, threat intelligence can help to dramatically, let's say, support in terms of how you should act. You can be, if you have, if somebody would share with you the previous experience of handling the specific incident, you may be informed about who are actually the bad actors, what they're interested in, and how to best, what is the best way to respond. So once again, this is all about sharing best practices, knowledge, actionable guidelines, the knowledge which every player on the market, in the industry, in the ecosystem collect as small pieces of puzzle. But each individual piece of puzzle is useless if you cannot actually use it to complement to the bigger picture. And maybe the final in my list, but of course not the final benefit of the threat intelligence, is actually complement to the risk assessment. It contributes dramatically because it helps the organization to prioritize their security efforts based on the likelihood of potential impact of different threats. If you know about the likelihood, the potential impact, you have the bigger chance to use this information knowledge wisely in order to spend your time, your efforts, your money probably in the right direction, to focus on what's really important and where it can strike. So in general, in essence, the threat intelligence is one of the key components of the comprehensive 5G security strategy. And unfortunately, one of the missing ones, because as of today, there is some positive movement, but still not enough. Although it really would help many organizations to anticipate attacks, to prepare, to be able to respond, remediate, and really address a lot of cybersecurity issues which present in 5G. So multiple parties are definitely interested in this, and they should be both source and let's say the consumers of this information. Now, what else do I have to share with you? Probably about the resiliency. What the let's say the stage in life where we live today is that telecoms, they switch from simply the operating companies to digital service providers. At least this is what they're trying to do, right? And probably the strategy for cyber resilience is exactly what telecoms can borrow from digital companies like hyperscalers and big enterprises, because this is the opportunity both and responsibility to build some pieces of your infrastructure, to maybe not to build it manually yourself, but at least to have the wider range of experience and the knowledge in order to plan, to hire those people who can execute the plan, to control, to improve, and to continuously develop further. And of course, to do it in a flexible and I would say the software development style or way. And this is why in telecom world, so many professionals needed not only in network operations, but in clouds, applications, and in cybersecurity. So this leads us back to the question that I raised in the very beginning of my part: why someone would ever become cybersecurity pro, and why probably you may consider to do so. And I was thinking about this before the session, and these are, let's say, some of the reasons and some of my thoughts. Number one is that currently there is definitely a significant shortage of professionals in the field, so it's in demand, and the cybersecurity is necessary life actually. So some regions, they may be more advanced and developed, while other regions may be a little bit catching up, but still the need for the cybersecurity is global. So we have the global applicability of such a skill. And I would say that with our world continue to digitize, the stakes and the risks of vulnerabilities will undoubtedly increase over time, which means that it will also increase the value for the cybersecurity skill. More to this, I believe all of you can imagine the perfect job, probably with the best compensation ever, but incredibly incredibly boring. So cybersecurity is a very dynamic field, and it continuously grow in multiple directions. And given the development of technology, it always call for the new challenges and new problems to solve. So probably you will never be bored as an ever evolving field. Another thing is that there is a very broad range of roles that you can find yourself in cybersecurity, from entry-level positions to executive, even, because right now what we see, and this is 100% true, the chief risk officer is usual guy to participate in the board of directors, because this is the person who is in charge to take care about all the possible risks the organization may face, and he needs to be aligned with the all other, let's say, participants of the board to make sure that he's taking care and know how to mitigate this risk, to make the organization resilient to any kind of the risk. And of course, security risk is one of the obvious and proven, unfortunately. And probably the final one is that in pretty much every industry that I can imagine, from communications to healthcare to finance to entertainment, there is a need for cybersecurity professionals to protect their data, to protect their systems, So I must say that this actually, the last point, is what opens up the possibility of working in a field that you personally will be very interested and passionate about. So I try to make this open lecture, let's say, high level, very precise about cybersecurity, and more not about the technical parts, because technical part you can easily find. What's always missing in cybersecurity is the reason that cybersecurity is useless itself. It should always serve someone's interest, my interest, your interest as individuals, or interest of organization, or interest of the state. It should be complementary to the rest of the activities that we do. So I will share just a couple of links with you, not to overwhelm you with the information. If you feel like you saw just a glimpse of interest in cybersecurity, maybe you can take a look at the NIST 5 functions. This is a good start, because once again, this shows the reason for the cybersecurity to exist and why it is important and how to do it in an efficient way. And another one is about actually the applicability of the cybersecurity in the 5G context. Very nice, but quite hefty documents by ENISA, which is called the 5G Security Toolbox. A lot of documentation, but definitely something worth to explore, maybe as the entry point to this niche. Probably this wouldn't be enough to become a professional in the field, but you are more than welcome to reach out to me, probably via LinkedIn or maybe via email, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, maybe to support you somehow. And if I guess with Skill-Lync, with Sanjay, if we will identify more interest to speak more deeply, more precise from the process point of view, from the people point of view, and from the point of view, maybe we can think about other, let's say, materials, lectures, and webinars on this topic. So thank you. Thank you very much for your time this Saturday afternoon or this Saturday evening. This is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for it.
Thanks, Dmitry. Thanks for the wonderful session. Being coming from the telecom world, it was a new thing for me, and pretty enlightening session. Before we take up the question from some of the participants, I have two questions basically. The first question, when I talk about the enterprise, and when I talk about enterprise, I'm talking about the end users. End users doesn't mean you and me, but either the CSPs who are running the network operations, or the enterprise customers who may be using private networks or maybe some applications on these networks. So what is the best best fit for them, whether they need to build their in-house security team and train them with the experts who have been there, done that in the security space, or bring in a team like yours and then get it done from outside. So what is the best practice for those kind of enterprises, right? So building those practices inside, or maybe bringing the expertise from the outside, what will be the best practice?
Sure. This is the usual question, whether to build or buy.
Yeah.
Actually, it depends on the business, let's say, the business strategy and the size of the organization. Because if you have the plan to be the digital leader on the market, like Geo, definitely it's about having your own personnel. It's about having your own team, because you are not only utilizing probably this experience for your own network, but you will be able to sell it to the B2B customers. You will be able to utilize it in multiple nice ways. If you are a small, decent company, maybe a small to medium enterprise, probably it will be too hard to build your own team. It will take too much time. Maybe it will be even too much costly. Definitely today, with the amount of companies providing the outsourcing offering for managed security services, for instance, you can easily find the right partner who will be able to support you. Maybe not forever, but at least on the exact stage of your business. Maybe your choice would be to outsource this function for some time, while trying to build your own team in parallel to perform some knowledge transfer And maybe in 5 years from now, when your business will scale, you will decide that, okay, now I'm ready to go myself independently. And or maybe you will continue to outsource some of the functions.
Yeah.
Usually, this is the balance.
Yeah, kind of. We started telecom networks. We used to have a term called as EOT or BOT, build, operate, transfer, so something of that kind of model that you're talking about, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
The second question is from the individual perspective. Let's say I come from the telecom domain, right? So have never worked on the security side of it, right? So what makes me, what takes to become a cybersecurity professional? Of course, it is a pretty, exciting world. And I am sure there are a lot of opportunities which are going to grow with the openness in the network. Right. So what is the learning path, or what are the technologies, what are the skills we need to learn to become a cybersecurity expert along with the being a telecom expert? So if anything you can share on that front.
Sure. I would say there are at least let's say two ways to develop yourself in this direction. If you're more on the management side, if you're more into the planning, organizing processes, then there are very nice certification courses about the practical implementation of cybersecurity in the enterprises. You don't need to try to find the exact course how the cybersecurity can be implemented in the telecom world. You don't need this. You just take the basics, maybe some kind of from ISO, from NIST. There are a lot of the open actually materials and not very much costly courses. How you can actually onboard into this world. This is if you're thinking more about the managerial type of the role, because you need to understand how cybersecurity support actually the business processes. It's always about the business process and the assets which need to be protected in order to keep the business running smoothly. If you're more on the engineering side, on the technical side, there are also brilliant courses about the offensive security, practical security. You start with the cloud, you start with the usual IT, usual enterprise security. More we see the convergence of the technologies. If you're familiar with the telecom space, I personally hired many people who are right now brilliant security auditors for the telecom networks. They used to be the telecom guys without much experience in the cybersecurity, but with the very good, let's say, backup by IT security courses. It's really quickly and pretty much straightforward. Maybe in 6 months or a year, you can become pretty much, if not completely fluent, then pretty much into the topic, and you will be able to apply your technical knowledge in this field. So right now it's quite easy, I would say.
Okay, thanks. I think that answers most of my question, and some of the questions which are being asked in the chat box. So there is one question comes from Jasveer, which says, how about typical challenges with the telco CSP driven enterprise? I think most of these things you have already answered during your session, right? What are the challenges for different kind of organization? There is another one which is coming from Abdul, which says how to become cybersecurity expert in telecom domain and switch from radio domain to security professional. Please tell the roadmap and also how to find the jobs in telecom security. So just to, I think the first part of this question is being already answered. What about the second part? If let's say I want to get into, let's say I did some certification and now I want to get into telecom security domain, right? So what are the best way to, what are the typical keywords, or is it typical companies who may look for these kind of professionals? So what are those target companies?
Maybe I would start with the telecom companies as the main, let's say, employer, for the simple reason, because what I see happening on the market is that security teams within telecom organizations, they usually used to reside on the IT side. They were responsible for the enterprise part of the business and all of this, let's say, CRM and the usual IT network. Now, with the further evolution and the convergence of technologies, they're also taking part of the responsibility over the telecom assets. But it's incredibly hard for them to negotiate with the network department, with the maintenance teams and so on, because these guys, they simply speak these different languages. So if you, being the radio engineer, probably you can study a little bit about in general, the network architecture, or maybe you're already aware of. And if you dig into the cybersecurity courses, then you could be the brilliant mediator between the network team and the security team to help them speak the same language, to help them define the right solutions. Because once again, in telecom companies, network department is still in charge for the availability, 5 nines, 6 nines, and so on, network operations center. Security teams, they have security operations center. In most of the cases, they're only capable to implement passive monitoring of what's happening over the telecom assets because they're not allowed to touch and fix it. So there is indeed the person needed who will be able to communicate and speak with both teams, just like you're fluent with the network, let's say acronyms, network understanding, and the same you can speak to the security guys. This is what I would definitely try.
Okay, thanks, Dmitry. Now, just a couple of more questions. Right. So one question is like, the cyber security and cloud security. So how do you differentiate it? One of the question from Mr. Abdul again. Right. So cloud
it's
security.
Not actually differentiated. It's not different. It should never be differentiated because cloud is just another type of the infrastructure that you need to protect. All the same type of, let's say, approaches, practices, and so on. It used to be applicable for the on-site, on-premises technologies, still applicable for the cloud infrastructure. In cloud, it's simply a little bit more, it may be a little bit more complicated because this, let's say, demarcation point about the responsibility, whether it is the hyperscaler responsibility or hosted parties, but in general, the rest, it's just a little bit new subset of technologies. You used to have private cloud, now more utilization of resources in public cloud. Okay, still the same. Less virtual machines, more containers, but what's relevant for the cybersecurity in general will be still relevant for the cloud. Okay. Just a little bit of the context to enrich it.
Yeah, and one more last question in the chat box. Okay, let me see if we are having more questions. I think there are. So, so if you see nowadays, because it's cybersecurity is getting so mainstream, many of the big companies, like they, instead of relying on the small companies, or maybe having some faith in their in-house expertise, right? They are relying on the consulting companies, the big four, or maybe any other company for that matter, right? So what is the business value proposition for security in 5G for the consulting companies? So how big is the consulting business market for the telecom security or security in 5G networks?
It's hard to estimate because numbers are really wildly different that we can find about the size of the 5G security market. But what we can see personally in SecurityGen, the demand is quite high because Big Four, they will easily jump on pretty much every project related to the construction of the new 5G network and so on. But when it comes to some specifics, I must say, it will be important to find the person who can perform the offensive testing, maybe the simple penetration testing exercise, but with a good understanding of the surrounding infrastructure. Because it's a little bit different when you're trying to break into the Windows domain or you're trying to break into the NVI infrastructure. Even though the stack of technologies nowadays can be pretty much simple, in order to understand how to prioritize your activities and how to prioritize security measures, you need to have better understanding of the context. And this is why telecom security, industrial security will always be, let's say, a very specific need with a very, very demanded security professionals. I personally see that people reach out to us from pretty much across the globe, looking specifically for the expertise in the field.
Right. So there are two more questions. So one is like, what do you think about the security challenges in private 5G and how IEC 62443 can be aligned to solve this problem? Right. And another one is there is something called as, 5G non-standalone is highly vulnerable to denial of service DOS attacks. How do we really countermeasure this DOS attack?
Sure. Okay, let's start with the private networks. Yeah. Well, first of all, private networks is still on the very, very, let's say, the beginning of wide implementation. there are not so many cases across the globe. It's like maybe hundreds of the private network deployed. I believe still majority of them are LTE-based campus networks for seaports, maybe for mining companies, for maybe for healthcare or large-scale factories. But in general, when we speak about the private network from the LTE, it's pretty much like the extension of your corporate enterprise network. This is like this better substitution for the Wi-Fi, for the WiMAX network. If it's not integrated, if it's not connected to the rest of the networks, I don't see much of the difference in terms of the protection of this infrastructure. Completely different situation will be in 5G, because the private network can be quite different. It can be completely private network with all the bits and pieces belonging to the specific factory, radio, core, all these things. And it can be shared infrastructure with the base stations, shared with the macro network, and you only share this, let's say, part of the infrastructure. Or it can be just a slice, and you understand that you're actually operating within the public network. You're just operating with these within, let's say, the isolated slice dedicated to your specific company. So it's quite different. And I cannot say that there is a lot of real life deployments as of now. I personally haven't seen much. All the cases that we've seen were very nice, let's say, test bed deployments, working just fine. So I cannot say that private 5G network in general, security of the private network, wildly different from the security of the big 5G network. It will be simply maybe a little bit easier to protect because the amount of assets is smaller, and it probably belongs to you, so you're more flexible in terms of ways and measures that you would like to implement. This is what's about the private network.
Okay, so one last question. Yeah, please carry on. Yeah, sorry to disturb you.
Sure. And another question was about the non-standalone networks, I believe, right?
Yep, right.
Well, non-standalone networks, it's like, okay, based on the evolved packet core, definitely pretty much vulnerable to the same subset of attacks and threats which were relevant for the 4G and previous networks as well, because still EPC operates with GTP, diameter, and SS7 to a large extent to communicate with roaming partners. So yes, it is vulnerable. And let's say this is the kind of the old legacy backdoor that operators need to take care of. Because if you remember this, 89% of vulnerable networks, a lot of them are still vulnerable because of the exposure of unprotected SS7 and to some extent diameter and GTP as well. So you're right.
So just let us take one last question before we wrap up the session, and that is like, any update on the SMS security in 5G? We see SMS as a forgotten aspect of the network. So are we doing something new in 5G, or it's still the same, the way we were treating in the legacy networks?
Frankly speaking, I do not even oversee the development of this. I understand that the voice over new radio will be pretty much like voice over LTE because the IMS is still the same. Yeah. Probably for the text messages, it'd be very much similar if you wouldn't see, dramatic development of the rich communication services. In general, this is not the major revenue stream and will never be. So the focus should be in something different. It should be either the maybe some kind of premium connectivity or some private networks, some smart solutions built into the private networks, or maybe security embedded into the slicing technology. Text messages probably will never be that meaningful part for the telecoms as before.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Dmitry. But just one last question. So any suggested reliable reference for compliance except CIS documentation for 3G and 4G networks? Any reference links?
Compliance is usually quite local. So you better Google what the local network telecom authorities suggest. As I previously shared, if you're interested in some kind of security controls, actionable guidelines, good knowledge, go through the 5G security toolbox by ENISA. This is a very good set of the documentation And recently they released so-called 5G security matrix or something like this, very massive Excel file breaking up different domains of the network with different types of the security exercises which should be implemented. Pretty much you can use it in the form of compliance to make some kind of the comparison if you have implemented any of these activities in your organization. So you will see how to compare yourself to some kind of the benchmark.
Okay, I think that's all what we have got. So thank you everyone for joining in. Thanks Dmitry for the wonderful session. It was a great evening, and everybody has come on Saturday and attending this session, and it was really wonderful interacting with all of you. And thanks Dmitry once again. We look forward to you to have you in some detailed sessions as well in future. Thank you everyone. Thanks. Have a great evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye. Cheers.